Hi, Science 10. In this video, we're going to look at how materials, how particles get in and out of cells. Particles like nutrients, for example. We've got some plants here, and of course in the soil there's various nutrients, and of course water is really, really important. And so ultimately, this video is going to be about how do particles like water and nutrients get in and out of cells. First, let's just maybe talk about this celery and how would water get out of it? Because we know it's full of water. You could take a nice bite out of this. We'd just leave it out, right? And it would dry. Take a look at what happens if we leave this out for about 24 hours. Take a look at this. So that same piece of celery, here we've got it here. We've left it in the water now, and it is no longer all limp. It's reabsorbed. So through the cell membrane and the cell wall, and remember plant cells, of course, have a cell wall, but they also have a cell membrane or a plasma membrane. The water has gone in, it's been moved into the cell by osmosis from an area of high concentration, well, this water cup, into an area of lower concentration, the cells inside of the celery. So yeah, that's what this video is going to be looking at, is how materials move in and out of cells. We'll take a look at a couple more examples here. So how does the water go from the water glass, inside of the glass, into the cells of the celery? Well, of course, it's a process called osmosis. We're going from an area of high concentration of water, lots of water, pure water here, to an area of a little lower concentration in the celery. So it'll naturally flow in that direction. To help that, the celery's got some salts and sugars inside of it to basically draw the water inside. But let's talk about that concept of diffusion. Watch this. Let's get a little fire going here. All right. So as we've got a fire going, basically what's happening is, of course, there's smoke coming off. And we could eventually smell that smoke. And the reason, there we go, I can smell it right now. The reason why I can smell that smoke is we're going from an area of high concentration to low concentration. There we go, put the fire out. Notice all of the smoke, which I can definitely smell, going from an area of high concentration to low concentration. That's diffusion. That's one of the ways the particles move in and out of cells, not just plant cells, but also our cells. Okay, let's look at this. Here's another example of diffusion. Watch what happens here as we go from an area of high concentration to low concentration. Notice how those particles that I've just poured into the water just naturally spread out. They diffuse. Won't be concentrated in one place. It'll eventually get all equal concentration across the whole cup of water. Again, that's just simple diffusion, going from high concentration to low concentration. Okay, we're going to look at how particles move in and out of cells. So if we look carefully here, we can almost see the cell membrane of the onion cells here. Now, of course, it's also got a cell wall, but just like you and I, it does have a plasma membrane. And both of them can allow cell wall, plasma membrane, cell wall, can allow materials to go in and out. But what is the actual structure of a plasma membrane, of the cell wall? And whether it's your cells or even a plant cell, both of those, a key part of that structure is lipid or fat, so like butter. Now, you know how butter reacts with water. Well, they don't really mix, right? And so this actually helps. And water is really important for cells, obviously, but we don't want too much water inside of a cell. So again, just kind of take a look at how oil and water do react. They don't mix well together. What we call oil is, we call it hydrophobic. It hates water. It doesn't want to mix with water. And that's actually a good thing if you think about it. If you're going to be designing, or how a cell has evolved, it's evolved to keep either water out or to keep the water in. So that's a key part, and we're going to be looking at that, the structure of the cell membrane, also called the plasma membrane, found in both plant and animal cells. Yeah, let's take a look at that. So we've already seen how the cell membrane basically allows materials to come in and out. Saw diffusion, saw the structure, so the lipid let's get into it with this lesson. But yeah, you can see over top of me here basically the model of a cell membrane. Of course, you know, throughout our body, we've got to from our blood, we've got to be getting oxygen into our cells, carbon dioxide out. You can see that happening right here. That's an actual electron microscope picture from an electron microscope of the cell membrane itself. So you can see it's quite an amazing structure. You can see that phospholipid bilayer, which we're going to talk about. So yeah, so let's get, I'll share the screen here. We're going to get underway. Just got to get the right one. There we go. All right, so where you're at in the course right now, we're just going to go into chapter 8, and then you'll be ready to do the unit exam. Also the science notebook, the cell organelle and osmosis demo, and that's going to be basically putting a couple chunks of celery, one into a solution with salt water, and the other into a solution just tap water. And of course, the salt water solution is hypertonic, and the tap water is hypotonic. But yeah, we'll talk about that in a little more detail in a video specifically on that project that you need to get done. You should be just completing the Unit 4 quiz 1. And so yeah, here's we are, cell membrane and transport. There's an assignment that you'll do once we complete this lesson and complete, of course, the readings. Textbook is optional, but yeah, we suggest you read that section right there in the textbook, and we've told you where those pages are. But yeah, let's begin. Let's start our notes. All right. So what we're going to look at in this video really are two key things: the structure of the cell membrane, and start it with me right here. Let's draw it. Now, this is, of course, if you zoom way in, you know, this would be a super small structure. So there's the cell membrane on an animal cell. Cell membrane on a plant cell, they do have them. Of course, they have the cell wall, which you and I don't have, but there's its cell membrane. If we zoom down, the top is a phosphate, and actually water likes it, or it likes water. But then these little tails here is the lipid, and you saw that in the demo, and we know that fat pushes water away. It's hydrophobic. It hates water. Now there's also channels in the membrane to let things in, because not everything can just simply diffuse through the membrane. Water can, through osmosis is what it's called, but also oxygen can come in and carbon dioxide out. So there's channels to let big things like glucose to get in. Let's keep drawing this here. It's like a mosaic of different parts. There's also pumps. Pump in things like sodium ions, potassium ions, pump them in and out, especially your neurons right now in your brain are doing that. Also the neurons in your hands and your eyes. As you're writing these notes, as you're drawing this little model, and do draw it with me here. This pump right here is needed by your neurons to make them work so they can fire. And yeah, so the basic structure and processes, we'll talk a little bit. There's a detailed video about processes though, but there are three key processes that you can see right here. Diffusion, which we've already talked about, facilitated diffusion, you can see it happening, and active transport, where we need a little bit of energy, a little bit of cell ATP, or well, ATP is what the cells use. So again, plant cell here, animal cell. You're going to want to, of course, know the key organelles and the differences, but we're going to look specifically at the cell membrane. Let's start with its structure. So yeah, let me flip to that slide. All right. So the outside of the cell, the inside of the cell, this is the structure of the cell membrane. These little circles at the top is a phosphate group. The little tails is the lipid. We call it a phospholipid bilayer. So let's write that down. You can see it on the screen here. Again, you might need to pause the video. It's actually a good idea as I'm going through things. So it's phospholipid bilayer. This is the structure of a cell membrane. And ultimately, that phospholipid bilayer does have channels. So some things just go in through a process called facilitated diffusion. Some things need pumps. Some things need active transport. This phospholipid bilayer is also a mosaic of many different things. So a mosaic is a bunch of different things put together, but in a nice way. It's flexible, especially, you know, if you kind of poke your skin, you can tell that your cell membranes are flexible. And it doesn't hurt to draw it again. So this phospholipid bilayer, there's a phosphate at the top that likes water, then a lipid tail connected to it, bonded to it, then another one of these lipids and a phosphate. There's a phosphate group at the top, lipid, 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 phosphate there. This part does like or love water. This is hydrophilic. So it likes water. This part, though, is hydrophobic. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it is critical for a cell to be able to get water in and keep it, but to also not have too much water come in. Also, it's critical for a process, you know, for these channels to let things like ions, things that just will not go through a cell membrane, but they can just slip down through a facilitated diffusion through this channel without actually any energy. Then again, this idea of a mosaic, parts of your membrane, your cell membranes are going to have pumps. So kind of draw it like this to kind of denote that it maybe needs a bit of energy to open and close its door. Again, for your neurons right now, they're actually pumping sodium ions and potassium ions out. Well, potassium ions in, sorry, and sodium ions out. And that's to create a potential for your neuron to fire. So yeah, make sure you've got this drawing. You've got the idea that there's some channels, there's some pumps. The phospholipid bilayer, the top likes water, the middle here doesn't like water, and then the bottom does like water again. So it, you know, it can exist in water and not get totally waterlogged. You know, some of the most key things that move in and out, especially for us being animals, we need the O2 to diffuse in, so oxygen in easily diffuses, just passes through, and CO2 out. It's interesting for a plant, that's actually different, right? Plants, it goes in the other direction. They need the CO2, so they actually breathe CO2, plants, and then they breathe oxygen out. We breathe oxygen in and CO2 out, but this is happening right at all of your cells. You got at least 1 trillion cells, and your capillaries feed every one of all of your cells are fed throughout your whole body, and they're being given oxygen, and then of course the blood is taking away the CO2. Your blood is also going to have glucose, bringing it to your cells, and other nutrients, and some of those nutrients will just diffuse in, but probably most of them are going to need to use some kind of facilitated diffusion or active transport to get in. So what's the job of the cellular membrane? Let's talk about that, the job of the cellular membrane. And let's get you the right slide. That's the structure. Cool looking for sure. There we go. Gatekeeper. So the cell membrane is a gatekeeper. It is semi-permeable. Again, you're going to want to pause these and actually get all this information down. I'm highlighting some really key information, of course, for you. Semi-permeable, you know, means not everything gets in. Some things can get in real easy. For example, O2 can go in no problem from an area of high concentration to low, because the cell is always burning that oxygen. And again, down here in cellular respiration, it's burning oxygen with glucose, giving off CO2 gas. So that CO2 gas, which is toxic to us, it comes out. It easily diffuses out. And of course, this little model we're drawing here, you know, there'd be the whole cell membrane. We'd be going right through the cell membrane right here. You know, the phospholipid bilayer, easily diffusing in and out. So those two come in. Water does not come in as easy. Water just seeps in through osmosis. Again, it'll go from an area of high concentration to low, so it will diffuse. So that's just a fancy word for water diffusion is osmosis. But many things need to come in through channels or pumps. We don't have a picture of a pump right here. Again, take a look at the structure. You got your hydrophilic, the water loving, that's up at the top here. So this part, the phosphate at the top loves, and then this hates water. That allows not too much water to get in and not too much water to get out. It allows for perfect homeostasis. The cell can balance itself. Of course, when we get thirsty, it means your cells need water. When you get hungry, it means your cells need nutrients, probably specifically some glucose. So yeah, that's the structure. Really important to understand that structure. You can see these are very large molecules made up of lots of carbon and hydrogen, so that's also pretty cool. Let's look at it from an electron microscope now, the cell membrane. So we can really see here the phospholipid bilayer. You can see that fluid mosaic. So this is a very squishy and it's a movable membrane that each of your cells is made up of. And in the next video, what we're going to be looking at are the key processes. And we've already talked about it a little bit. Diffusion, though, is one. Facilitated diffusion is the second one. And then the third one is active transport. Again, we'll just kind of end off with making sure that you do understand the structure of a cell membrane, that you've got a picture in your mind, and it's a really good idea just to do again a quick drawing of a cell membrane, do it correctly, where you've got your phosphate on the top, you got your little lipid tails, and it's a bilayer, meaning it's two layers, one on top of the other. And of course, it's a mosaic. It's got little channels. It's got little pumps throughout. Let's just draw quickly a little pump here. And all of that to get materials in and out of your cell membrane, or if it's a plant, or if it's another animal. Okay, so take care. That is the cell membrane. Next, we're going to look at the processes that get materials in and out of the cell membrane.